Greetings, Earthlings. Just kidding. Had to get that one out of my system. Actually, I have no idea if there are even any Earthlings still out there. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's somebody, but, within the sound of my voice is an open question. But for that matter, we've been sending these signals out into the universe for what, 100 years? No idea if or where they land. Maybe, as I speak now, you're watching reruns of The Honeymooners. Or, well, they won't be reruns where you are. Bang! Zoom! To the moon, Alice! No, really, we're not all like that. And even that was intended to be a parody of the whole patriarchal thing. We're not monsters. Sometimes we're worse. So, for what it's worth, I'm broadcasting from north. Fairly far north. Northern Canada north. About as far north as you can get without being in the actual Arctic Circle. I don't know if there's anybody else up here who managed to dig in before it all became unlivable. Anywhere south of here is too hot to survive, anywhere north is just about pure methane gas. So, I managed to burrow into a hillside, load up on Campbell's soup and air filtration units, and seal the door. So, I'm here now. No going back out. But hey, there's Wi-Fi and a radio tower. Internet's been pretty quiet these days, though. I keep hitting refresh. But if you're out there, I'm Ariel@gmail.com. I inherited that address from somebody who doesn't seem to be using it anymore. Sometimes I send myself emails just to hear the little ding, make sure it all still works. I'm trying to figure out how to rig the internet to recognize any changes in whatever remote corner of it might still be working. Maybe a Google alert set to, every possible word? Internet, I don't know how it is you're still out there. Are you in the cloud somewhere? Hey, refresh. Ugh, damn Huffington Post. I remember when you'd have something new up every 5 minutes. Now I'm stuck with ugly Ted Cruz again and again and again for eternity. Enough to make you want to claw your eyes out. CNN and USA Today are worse. Gomer and Inhofe, flat earthers. Ugh. Mars Colony 1, are you out there? Anything? A ding? Hello? Was gonna have a Mars Colony 2, 3, 4, and on up. Never quite relocated Cape Canaveral in time. But hey, we did manage to send off Nina Mission 1 before it all fell apart. You guys out there? Was supposed to be a Penta and a Santa Maria, too. I know, you're moving. Too fast for my voice to catch up. Approaching the speed of light yet? Passing Pluto? There's nobody here to contradict me, so I hereby declare it a planet again. I don't care what that fucking Neil deGrasse Tyson says. Yeah, I know, he was right on all the other shit. So, here I am. All alone in my cozy little hobbit home. No Gandalf heading my way to muck up the door. No one to talk to. No one answering the email ding. At first, I thought it was temporary until a really bad August blew over. Even way up here, we were looking at daytime temps of 120 Fahrenheit, not Celsius, centigrade. I still can't get used to that shit. No, I'm not Canadian. Wish I was, I wouldn't feel so culpable. Nighttime was cooling off to a breezy 105. These temps aren't unheard of. Used to be you'd have a hot spell for a week or so. Sometimes people dying of heat exhaustion. Someplace like Chicago might be 20, 30 people. Actually, now, that would be a really, really good day. When it all went worldwide, a good day might be 20, 30,000. Even then, we had the idiot libertarians. Thin the herd, survival of the fittest. They pretty much turned out to be not among the fittest, but who knows? Maybe one of them is in a bunker somewhere. Rand Paul? No, that's right. Rand Paul was in D.C. when that place lit up like a tinderbox. Of course, it's possible that some of them are still 20 stories below, where they keep all the good Kentucky bourbon. I didn't load up on booze until it was too late. At least I've got water, my own pump, my own well. I've also got one of those crazy filtration units that turns pee back into water. Saving that for last resort. Like when the pump goes dry or water gets contaminated. I don't know if the water or the air conditioning will go first. The air is powered by solar, but the main unit is outside, shaded by solar panels. But once that goes... Oh, right. August. Was up to 120. September around 110. October, November maybe 100-ish. It's not really going back down. So, here we are. Or here I am, anyway. Nothing to do but talk into the void. Why stay? Why not let go? Good question. Maybe my answer sounds ridiculous, but it's the only one I've got. You see, I'm not entirely certain this whole humanity experiment was ever actually supposed to work. Sure, we managed to develop opposable thumbs, generate cognitive thought, create the wheel and tools and the internet and Shakespeare. Not in that exact order. You know how a baby is, like, universally loved? Even the really ugly ones have something in them that sets off a nurturing genetic code, turns us all into puddles of smiling and cooing and gibberish. Which is great. And at the other end of that, those babies are getting hugged and cuddled and fed and changed, and that's great too. Except that that baby assumes that that phase is going to last. Because that baby assumes that all of that love and cuddling and food is probably something that they deserve. Meanwhile, we all learned to outsmart the animals that wanted to kill us. We bent the land and the elements to do our work for us. To feed us, to light and heat our homes, to cool our cars, to protect us from intruders. We were smart. We kept ourselves safe. But for those of us who stayed safe over time, we mostly decided that that was something that we deserved. The world was cuddling and cooing and feeding us, sometimes providing us with more intimate pleasures. And we were good with that. How great that we deserved all that. We must have done something really special to be so really loved. God must really love us to give us all that. You know, I hope there's a God. That would be nice. Maybe I'm the last one to go and they're all calling out, "Come join us! Come join us!" Not hearing that right now. But the human impulse is like that baby impulse. Before long, you're walking and talking, and they stop loving you for who you are, but for what you can do. And that's kind of a shock when you realize that you're the one who's ultimately responsible for your own shit. And as a baby, you're in for some down days. Some down years. Well into adolescence, where you finally get the concept of your own shit, and you learn not to lie in it, but to clean it up. That's, both literal and psychological shit. So, the evolving species is like that baby who just won't grow up. Despite what we learn from math and science, we're still looking for that parent figure, that God, if you will, to clean it up. And because we hate the idea of cleaning it all up, we project words into God's mouth. God says, "How arrogant of you, you puny humans, to think that you can possibly damage the beautiful planet that I gave you with your pitiful technology. I gave you food, water, sky, coal, gas, oil, fusion, fission, to have dominion over, to use and enjoy. You ungrateful bastard, driving a Prius." And I guess it's pretty much the same for that baby. You have been cooking me food. You are lord of the stove, and I am not worthy to touch it. You have dominion over the lawn and the vacuum cleaner, and it is not for me to touch, or to improve, or to damage. We give away our responsibility for management of the thing when that thing is so vast and incomprehensible that we could never collectively wrap our heads around it. And if we ever do manage to wrap our heads around it, it's usually bad news. Much easier to say, I am not meant to understand, but rather to accept this generous bounty. Huh. Of course, there are always those naysaying infidels who insist that carbon has built up to over 600 parts per million, and certain death will ensue unless we radically change our behavior. It's really actually much easier to give up smoking, and sex, and eating. Oh, right. The big why. Look, we're about done here. My air hasn't broken down, my water hasn't dried out, but tomorrow may be another question. Or the day after that, or the day after that. When summer comes around again, I don't expect 120 is going to be the stopping point. It may be 130, 140, 150. I can't imagine any equipment left running outdoors is likely to survive the stress. So, 1 year at the most. 1 month, 1 week, 1 day, more likely. Or worst comes to worst, there's always the pills on the night table. But in the meantime, here's my question to the great beyond. I'm never going to hear the answer to it. Nobody here on Earth is ever going to hear the answer to it. Mars 1, Nina, I'm sure you guys must have noticed the lack of communication heading back your way. You get the internet where you are? I know, you've got your hands full, but generations from now, you might want your descendants to be kicking this one around. Mostly, though, this is for the universe at large. Klingons, Vulcans, Wookiees, Ewoks. I need this to be non-species centric. The question: is this inevitable? Will our technology always outrun our maturity? Individually, we can put our hand on that stove. We have that ability. But most of us reach sufficient cognition before we do any damage with that stove. Likewise, fireworks, alcohol, cars, sometimes the tiniest touch on the stove, a fender bender with the car, is enough to get us to adjust our behavior. But as a species, collectively, as a group, we default to the age of 9. We cannot come to the collective conclusion that it's time to stop drinking, to douse our fireworks, and take our foot off the gas. And so we race, screaming, off into the darkness. Is this the answer that awaits us all? Humans? Klingons, cockroach, lizard people? Droids? Maybe droids could figure this out. Hey, they had the 3 laws of robotics. Why didn't we have that programmed into us? In the billions of worlds that are out there, there must be a tiny fraction that can sustain life. Some develop slowly. They may still be in the amoeba stage. Others faster, perhaps faster than us. And so, intelligent life. Born like a baby. Into a world of resources, learning to tame the elements. How many times has this happened since the Big Bang? Could we possibly be the first? That sounds a little arrogant to me. But do they all develop opposable thumbs and learn to walk erect only to blow themselves up and wipe themselves out? We've actually had 5, well, now 6, extinction events that we know of. Vast numbers of species go out of business, the planet hits the reset button and starts over. Turns out just because we had brains and shit didn't make us immune or exempt. Or, in the words of the late great Rick Perry, oops. So, is this why we don't have any actual ETs? Hey, if you're out there, grow the fuck up, would ya? Sure, you've evolved over 1 million years, but watch out for that first internal combustion engine. It's gonna bite you in the ass. Yes, God gave us oil. Or God gave us trees that got squeezed into oil, or God gave us fungus that turned into trees. But if we're going to pass the responsibility over to God, then, then God did also give us brains and logical thinking and ultimately science. And while it was to some degree science, along with the oil and the engine, that got us into this mess, it was also science that showed us the impact that shit was having on air, climate, temperature. We loved and embraced one aspect of science when it pleased and served us. We reject other aspects that threaten to take our goodies away. Year in, year out, Earth in, Earth out. Is this a cycle? Will each infant planet come to the same conclusion? Or is it possible for maturity to outrace technology? How many of you infant sentient species were there out there who never made it past that first year as a toddler? How many are out there now toddling along? How many have been listening to this odd stream of radio waves coming from Earth over the past century? Did you get bored and stop listening? Did you listen long enough to figure out there was some kind of language there? Are you listening now?
Some would say that the search for meaning is a waste of time, that all human life is just a cosmic accident, an arbitrary conglomeration of molecules evolved by chance into an organism with a brain stem, condemning it to ponder futilely the reason behind it all.
Well, I know Dr. Crane is just trying to keep the conversation lively.
On the off chance that you're listening now, or perhaps are recording this as some odd series of bleeps and bloops that you'll play back and translate later, I bleed my words into the abyss. What do you think these noises are? Are they God to you? Does God speak to you in bleeps? Probably not if you've been watching American television for the last 30 years. Okay, let's go with the God thing. Yeah, okay. This is God speaking. Let me think up some commandments. Okay, here's one. Air conditioning. Whatever planet you live on, you evolved into a thinking species without air conditioning. Your planet is, by definition, habitable. Work with it. The impulse to terraform your planet threatens an immeasurable number of indigenous species upon whose shoulders you stand far more precariously than you might possibly imagine. And I say this as someone who, A, hates spiders, and B, will likely be dead within 24 hours of air cutting off. Commandment 2. Stop idling. We drew up laws against idling in our last couple of years. I don't mean laziness, though, of course, there's that. There came a time in which it became impossible to go anywhere outside without driving while running the air conditioner. But once people reached their destination, they couldn't bring themselves to turn the air conditioning off. And so, they idled, running the most expensive air conditioner ever developed, belching tons of carbon into the air just for the sake of cooling down a few cubic feet of space. Towards the end, people were being torn from their cars, but by that time, you get the idea. Commandment 3. Do not get too attached to any given technology. Just because you can do it and might use it doesn't mean that you ought to. The average round-trip transocean airplane flight has a carbon footprint roughly equivalent to driving the average car through the course of the average year per passenger. Eliminating air travel altogether would have been the equivalent of taking like 1 million cars off the road per day. But we Pandoraed air travel out of the box and never even thought about putting it back in. We spent centuries yearning to be as free as birds, and the occasional cavity search for the privilege of sitting in a narrow aluminum tube with liquids of no more than 3 ounces was just about as close as we were going to get. But once we had it, and lo, there came unto the people the vision of the hockey stick. Not a commandment. Just, God talking. Somewhere around the turn of the millennium, somebody noticed the graph of temperatures was oddly reminiscent of a hockey stick. A long, steady decline, reaching back over maybe 10,000 years, followed by a sudden swoop upwards, starting kind of around the Industrial Revolution, but never widely noticed or articulated until the 21st century. At which point, we all kind of looked at it and said, wow, yep, that's a warming trend. But we thought we still had time. Because it was a hockey stick. It angled down and then it angled up. It was still an angle. People argued about the meaning of the angle. Some denied it, but it was still just an angle. We had time to adjust our behavior, make a change, wean our way ever so gradually off of the stuff, starting like first thing tomorrow. We didn't count on that angle continuing to curve, continuing to accelerate, turning from an angle into a plane. An exponential growth of anything never looks like very much at first, but then it builds up quite suddenly. Things don't happen in isolation. Things affect other things, and other things change, and those changed things affect the first things, making them worse. And the worst things impact the second things, making them terrible. And we hit the wall. In our case, the second thing was the methane. Am I getting too technical with it all? Maybe I should just stop with things affect other things. Okay, well, quickly. We all knew about carbon. It was clouding the air, creating the greenhouse effect, trapping heat, driving up temperatures. It's a bitch. And with those rising temperatures, stuff started to melt. We all knew it would swell the oceans and wreck the coastline, and all that happened, slow at first, but then kind of fast. But along with the icebergs and the glaciers, there was also the permafrost. Stuff that hadn't melted in Anyways, permafrost. Stuff that hadn't melted in 10,000 years was now melting in the course of about 10 years. All at once. Releasing methane, yes, farts, shit, gas, bacteria. Stuff that had been trapped in the permafrost, which was suddenly nowhere near so perma as it had cracked up to be. It turns out that methane heats stuff up even more. More ice melts, less light is reflected away from where ice once was, which generates more heat, kicking off a seemingly never-ending series of forest fires, which coughs even more carbon into the air, all the while eradicating carbon-reducing, oxygen-producing plant life. And suddenly lands that were once capable of bearing crops are now drier than the Dust Bowl, triggering famine, starvation, sudden spikes in migration. Spikes redoubled by the rising sea levels, which, given that 10% of the world population had been living within 30 feet of sea level, and don't get me started on all the nuclear plants parked and eventually abandoned on the shoreline, generates yet another flood, this one of refugees. And as if that were not enough, the melting permafrost sets free, the mothers of all ancient diseases, which now, like Captain America, are back in the game, hitting us with anthrax, bubonic plague, stuff I'd never heard of and still can't pronounce, financial collapse, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Each and every one of these things sets off each and every part of every other thing, which in turn recranks up the original thing. It's a feedback loop. But for those of us who still can, just blast the air conditioning, leave the car running, keep flying, jack up the shit that was making the problem bad in the first place, and hold off the refugees as long as you possibly can. And shit gets worse, and wars break out like overnight. And the blood of English shall manure the ground. Things affect other things. A bedtime story. Shit. Fuck. Shut up. Hey! Sorry. Shake it off.
thousands, a century is behind us.
But you can't deny that you're still a dangerous, savage child race.
Most certainly I deny it. I agree we still were when humans wore costumes like that 400 years ago.
Which time you slaughtered millions in silly arguments about how to divide the resources of your little world. Since then, there are no indications that humans will ever change.
But even when we wore costumes like that, we'd already started to make rapid progress.
Oh yeah? You want to review your rapid progress?
Is it possible? Is it rational? Is it in any way meaningful to fight on behalf of a people you've never met, will never meet, maybe, probably don't exist? I know. They're not people. They're, let's say, intelligent life. Well, anyway, if not that, then what meaning can there possibly be? Commandment 4. The cost of buying a thing needs to reflect the expense it inflicts on the planet at large. There once was a time when a gallon of gas was less than $1. I still remember when it was less than $2. But that $1 or $2 only accounts for the expense of extracting it out of the ground. The pumps and the pipes, the transport, the ads, the lobbyists, lawyers. Turns out that for each single dollar's extraction was another, say, $2 impact on the planet. Just guessing, we were spending $1 trillion or more every year on the gas. $2 trillion a year should have gone into wetlands, renewables, recyclables, trees, vacuuming the crap out of the oxygen. Planet infrastructure. We learned all of this on a personal scale. When we finally got cigarettes were a poison, we just taxed the shit out of it. Nowhere near enough to quite compensate, but most of those people were now dead already. But if every dollar creating the damage was matched by another $2 for repair, well, we might well have been a bit more discreet about spending that dollar to start with. So then, did we tax that $1 of gas? No! We subsidized it! We dropped down the cost of that dollar's extraction to just about 85 cents. The richest of companies yet known to man now paid out near zero in taxes. We collectively said, hey, we need all this shit to survive and succeed, and these bastions of commerce are risking their assets for magic elixirs that make our things go. They must be underwritten. Let us give them great grants and rewards, the shiniest metals for making the wheels of our industry turn as they churn rich black smoke on up into the air. Which brings up number 5. Those who make up your laws must not profit therein, because each single time they will bow to your magic elixir of profit far more than that vague and uncertain voodoo that your eggheads call science, forcing the 3 trillion cost of their gas on down to a most unsustainable 1. Side note, still God here, so listen. Money is not a thing. It's a concept, which we bring in to stand for those things we could have, if only we just had the money. And those things themselves are not things. They are representations of joy we have lost, love we have lost, the creative spark that has gone out on us. If I have enough things, if I can fly like a bird or race in my car against time till those feelings return, love, joy, sparks, tingles, those lost moments from back in the day when I used to deserve. Still waiting on that ding anytime anyone might well want to weigh in. Really? Sweden? New Zealand? There's somebody there in New Zealand, right? Okay. Well, then it's me in Proxima Centauri, or Terminus Centauri, or someplace in between. My voice goes out and you hear it in, 30 years? 3,000 or so? And then you'll talk back? In 66,000 years from this tick, you'll talk to a very hot planet in your unique accent and your own special diction. Of course, I won't be here. Nobody will. And you'll have learned English for no good reason. Unless maybe you managed to download some Shakespeare. But the planet itself won't be dead. Sure, the roads will all crumble, the buildings collapse, and maybe the last living things to survive will be cockroaches and some fungi. You might find yourself talking to some really fun guy. Sorry. It'll all go to shit for a time, and 1,000 years more, or maybe 1,000,000. The Earth has a cleanse. It rains and it buries the carbon below once again, and the skyscrapers form some new form of bedrock, and the fun guys form life, or the lizards form brains, become Klingons. And then you'll have someone to talk to from here. Except they'll speak Klingon, and it won't that much matter, because they'll all have sprung from primordial ooze and won't retain even the tiniest fraction of the institutional memory I have with me now. You could, if you wanted, catch them up on things. So, this is one way. As much as you might find you want to respond to someone quite so charismatic as me, by the time you reply, I just won't be all that much into you then. So, maybe just listen. I'm no kind of genius, just the last one to witness to things not quite costing as much as they probably ought. Cross-reference to rule number 4. So, sex. Sex was kind of important to us. Probably is to you too. It tingles, feels good, and you want to repeat what feels good. So you relive the success of your sex and successive conceptions. If it don't feel so good, then you're not so inspired to reseed the species, and your special branch of the prolific process simply won't stretch itself out so far. But for us it was good. Really good. I remember it. I still engage in it from time to time. Not quite in a way you could quite call productive. But boy, were we productive. And our sudden explosion of reproductive matter outpaced or edged out all the stuff gone before us. We toddled along with maybe 1,000,000 a really long time, till that whole farming thing, kind of took off. We had a slight hitch around 1300 when the bubonic plague, but we figured out hygiene and got back to work. We hit our first billion around 1800, number 2, 1920, and then 1960 and 75, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. In just 60 years, we tacked on 5 billion to double and triple the cumulative efforts of 150,000 long years as a species. The sex was, yeah, good, but without precedent. We were only just guessing that we could sustain at this pace. We were a great throng of sex-starved adolescents making all of it up as we toddled along. Extra billion, why not? Never mind at the same time we're using, food. We made up this sudden new craving for gas, for electric, for power. We needed it, craved it. It got us to shelter, it got us more comfort, it got us more sex. Some countries encouraged their folks to reproduce. It provided protection against other states, other kinds, that great horde of those swarthy barbarians. And then, we again put our words in God's mouth. Be fruitful and multiply. And there, for a little brief time, that paid off. Until, it didn't. So, rule number 6. Don't get over your skis. Grow only to where you can sustain the thread. Expanding to unheard of numbers the same time demand has run multiple laps blowing past all the output of all time gone by. Really a risky maneuver. Sure, easy for me to say now. Boy, when I was your age, I was some raconteur. Which is great. Share affection and love. Just don't multiply as if it were a race. 'Cause, to coin a phrase, that's a race to the bottom. In more ways than one. When you hit the point that the size of your species doubles and triples in less than one lifetime, take your foot off the gas. Find alternative ways to stimulate such an addictive sensation. I don't know why I'm so embarrassed to talk dirty to some other species. So, speaking of races, at each stage of the game, you find that you're faced with illusion of some competition. It's us against those not blessed by God, or us against the barbarians. It's us against the spotted owl. It's us against the Zika virus. Okay, maybe that one. But on the whole, not. We came to the random conclusion we were caught up in some competition. If I climb the ladder, I have the advantage and fill up my pockets with money that now that now is worth nothing, and pull up the ladder behind me. There was once a time when things were random. A roll of the dice where each roll might come up 1 through 6, but we started to roll most all 6s. More often than not, each year hotter than that gone before. The hottest year ever? How often do we get even one of those? All things being equal, well, once. Sometimes we would still roll a 3 or a 4, so some would say, "See, random! Not man, it was God!" Of course, that assumes it was God rolling lower for us, and not simply smiting our sins of excess with his 6s. And we'd roll one more 6, and another, except now all those 6s were closer to 12s, and we left any semblance of random behind in an unspoken pact to never acknowledge the screamingly impossible improbability. Number 7, acknowledge screamingly impossible improbabilities. We grew brains over eons, forged a language or two, developed statistical analysis, if only so that, the insurance companies could figure out how much to charge us. There was that time people seemed to forget the principal point of insurance. They famously said, "Hey, our healthiest people are stuck paying out for the sick." That should have been a clue, that all we had left was the ongoing struggle for privilege. We were all of us grabbing for stuff off the beverage cart in the few final moments before the airplane would crash to the ground, acquiring more stuff in the desperate race to fill that black hole that was all we now had left inside. Everybody kicks in. Each one loses a little, and no one gets thrown off the ship. We extend that principle to owls and bees and coral reefs. Each one arrives. We'll make that number 8.
Hello, Alice. This is me, Rob. Alice, I'm sorry. I'm miserable without you. Please come back to me, Alice. I apologize for everything I said.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm kidding myself. I talk to a you that I'll never know, broadcast to a planet that lives in my brain, and even if there might yet be some you in some state of awareness in some somehow survivable planet out there, even if you're out there, the odds I catch you in the brief microsecond of geo-astrophysical time in which you're equipped to get radio waves but haven't as yet blown yourselves off the map are maybe 1,000,000,000 to 1. And yet, microscopic as those odds might be, they are not yet 0. And as far away as you are, maybe separation is just an illusion. Maybe difference is an illusion. Communication is an illusion. Maybe me sitting here working through all this shit on some empty planet with no one to hear at least stirs a shift here in me. And maybe my shift in some way, somehow, somewhere, is felt, say, Tralfamador, a planet so far and so very much different from me. And perhaps that far corner, that ugly, unrecognizable race of Tralfamadorians, somehow yet is me. Is connected by some yet not knowable thread. A thread as unknowable to me here now as radio waves were 200 years past. Or not. Likely not. Number 9. Corporations are made up of people, my friend, but cannot be people. A robot may well be no part human being. But robots can't consciously injure a human or through some inaction allow that a human might so come to harm. Corporations? must act to maximize profit or otherwise risk getting sued by investors. It was under this dictate corporations had bid what they were well aware would heat up the planet and leave it a wasteland. So which of these two would you call Terminator? Which of these is more like people, my friend? Which of these has the freedom to obey the commandment to do unto others as you would have them likewise do unto you? Okay. Number 10. We ignore it all until we can't. And then it's too late. Deep down, we all knew where it was we were headed and what we most needed to do to correct it. Look, we had freedom. And freedom, yeah, freedom is awesome. Let's just say that we hadn't quite yet hit the impasse that ended the advantage of comforts we'd come to enjoy. Unilateral surrender of coveted comforts would mean sharp defeat in the harsh competition of conspicuous consumption we were all convinced we were caught in. So we shrug and enjoy what's yet left while sighing, well, it's too late now. The inertia has gathered a force of such strength no action I take now could save anything. It's now just a fait accompli. And instead of the struggle, we indulge that much more, if only to get past this issue that's hanging uncomfortably, awkwardly over our heads. Like the diet that only now serves to remind you of just how much you like French fries. We're effectively telling the next generation they should just go fuck themselves. While I might want to give up and jump off that cliff, I have no ethical right to pull all those others along in my wake. If the best I might offer is but one more day to the next generation, then I owe them that day, or that hour, that minute. The last generation, on the worst of their days, did at least as much as that for me, which is easy for me here to say. I score kind of poorly on plays well with others. Look, I had my job. It demanded some travel. I got good results and made people happy. I was making a difference. I mostly meant well. I tried to recycle. Well, when it was convenient. I planned out this move here up north. I followed the patterns of temperature, methane, and made my best guess. I bought up some land and hollowed the hill, insulated it, filled the largest of pantries with so many cans that I look like I'm living inside Andy Warhol's worst nightmare. I once kind of liked it, but now it all tastes like water with wet chunks of cardboard. It's not infinite. At best, the supplies could last me some 1 or 2 years. I bolstered the door with lead lining and bolts, and I kept on with driving my route until that day arrived. Half the country on fire, and there was just no going back past the border. Or at least no excuse to continue. So I pushed on back north and locked in. And here on my screen saw the myriad fires as they swept across the plains. For a while they would fight with the fires, and then they just ran. And from inside my hill I saw all this unfold. And I sealed up my door, and I shut myself in, and hoped no one would notice the door and the sight of a hill now encircled by odd solar panels that gave shade to a lone air conditioning unit which continued to run in the service of nothing. It was almost as if some dead miser had furnished his sepulchre with central air, which, if not true yet, it will quite soon be, almost any moment from now. Ding! Why don't you? Why don't you ding already? Sorry. So, these things drew attention. As the crowds fled, the heat and the fires and the sense that their brains were now boiling inside of their heads, they worked north and more north. A handful or so would trip over my door. They weren't stupid. A door, solar panels, the hum of a fan, they knew I was there. And some would walk past. A few would hold up and put it together, and knock on the door, politely at first, and then a bit more firmly, apologetic, insistent. Hello? Is there anyone home? They lingered a little and went on their way. More came, and heat grew, and the knocks became pounds, and the tone of the voice would become much more strained, and hellos turned to hey, and we're dying out here. And I watched as I sat, and I froze in my place, my most temperate place, where I would survive as but one person alone. Because stores for 2 years for one person will only last 1 year for 2, or 6 months for 4, or 3 months for 8. And once letting in one, I had no way to restrain just how many more might yet squeeze on in through. So, all that stuff I just said sounds good in the abstract, until it's just you and the others. And suddenly, yes, it is competition between you and the others who get thrown off the ship because we don't all quite get there together. So, all that stuff I just said was just stuff I just said. So, take those commandments for what they're worth, because they don't come from God. Just a person who failed at each step to step up to each one. But maybe you get ahead of the curve, of the hockey stick curve that turns into a wall, and adjust your behavior before all you see is how it's turned now, each man for himself. You can watch for the signs. Insurance, watch for insurance. If you can't work out that one, then it just will not work. Or perhaps plant a tree, or a trillion some trees. Just do me one favor. Record this and send it ahead. To the next, and the next. To the Klingons, the Vulcans, the Tralfamadorians. Pass it on. Maybe, just maybe, we'll catch someone in time. I'm done. I'm going to bed. I have doubts on if I'll be getting back up. This is Ariel, signing off. January 31st, 2030. Holy shit.